Before we begin, I'd like to acknowledge that I'm joining you from the unceded territory of the Musqueam, Squamish, and Tsleil-Waututh Nation.
Morning, everybody, or afternoon, depending on where you're joining from. Hamish Gamisa, founder of Sparx Publishing Group, joining you from the ancestral unceded territory of the Coquitlam First Nations folks.
So, welcome to Purpose Connections. For those of you who don't know me, I'm Tessa Vanderkop, a collaborator at Purpose Pathways, where we help businesses identify their purpose and embed it in their business model. And I'm also one of the co-founders of the Canadian Purpose Economy Project. And our vision is that by 2030, 25% of businesses in Canada will be purpose-driven, putting the well-being of people and planet at the center of our decision making. I'm also a passionate builder of communities, helping to bring people together in spaces like this, really to work collectively to make the world better. I had the absolute pleasure of collaborating with Hamish and Alex from Sparx Publishing Group on Purpose Connections, which is a quarterly free online gathering of social purpose leaders, professionals, and advocates coming together really to connect and learn and share on topics related to the purpose economy. And I'd like to now introduce you to Alex and Hamish to say a few words.
Hi everyone, I'm Alex Nicotina. I'm a head of growth at Sparx Publishing Group. And just a couple of housekeeping notes before we begin. This session is being recorded and it will be distributed to all session registrants through email, and it will be also posted on social media. And if you have any questions for the speakers, please submit them in the Q&A section, preferably not through chat, but through Q&A so that we can track it in Zoom down below, and we'll address them after the formal discussion. And now over to Hamish.
Thanks, everybody, for joining. I'm Hamish Gamisa, founder and president of Sparx Publishing Group. We're a full-service marketing agency that's focused on advancing adoption and awareness of purpose economy. And our social purpose is to amplify voices that catalyze positive change. We look at marketing and communications as a strategic tool to move the things that are better for the world faster and past things that aren't. And so that was a real catalyst in bringing Purpose Connections together, and certainly working with Tessa and all of the wonderful stuff that Tessa's been doing in the social purpose world. And so with that, I want to invite maybe Tessa to introduce our exceptional guests who I feel, completely underqualified to be talking to here, but are such a treat to pull together. So Tessa, if you want to maybe introduce our guest for today.
Yeah, thanks, Hamish. So thanks all of you for taking time out of your schedules to join us today. In today's Purpose Connections, we're really exploring how impact investment investors can continue to drive the social and environmental outcomes that we are all looking for. In the purpose economy, our goal is to create well-being for all, addressing both social and environmental resilience. And of course, we're going to look at what can businesses and organizations do to attract this kind of investment, particularly in these challenging times. So we're honored to kick off 2025 with our three distinguished guests. First, I'd like to introduce Christelle Francois. Christelle is the CEO of Equity Economic Development Group, a company focused on visionary progress, weaving a tapestry of intentional and impactful change in the economic landscape. In 2022, Christelle was listed among the top 100 most influential Black Canadians. She's the co-founder of the Afro-Canadian Cultural Center. She's also the board chair of Bone Social Impact and the board chair of the Table of Impact Investment Practitioners. She's also a founding member, along with me, of the Canadian Purpose Economy Project. And next, I'd like to introduce Joanne Norris. Joanne has led teams, strategy, and programming globally and across Canada on behalf of nonprofit and social purpose organizations for over 25 years. Throughout her career, Joanne has developed, delivered, and evaluated programs and projects that support women, Indigenous people, youth, and newcomers. Joanne has held several leadership roles in the social finance impact investing sector and currently consults with impact ventures, foundations, development finance, funds, and other impact-driven initiatives in social purpose organizations. And last but absolutely not least is Adam Spence. And Adam is the founder and director of SVX. He's also the co-founder of both the Mars Center for Impact Investing and the School for Social Entrepreneurs Ontario. And before his time at Mars, Adam was executive director of the Ontario Association of Food Banks and leader of numerous higher education and training organizations. He has spoken to audiences across Canada on issues related to education, poverty, and social finance. In 2002, Adam was awarded the Queen's Golden Jubilee Medal, and in 2012, he was named one of McMaster University's 125 People of Impact. Thank you so much, all of you, for joining us today. And over to Hamish.
Thanks, Tessa, and thanks again to our guest speakers and everybody who's joining us today. I just wanted to set the stage pretty quickly on purpose connections and how we got to this particular conversation. So Purpose Connections, as Tessa alluded to earlier, is a space that we wanted to create intentionally to explore various facets of social purpose and its connection to how we live, work, and play. We want to look at these sessions as an opportunity to advance our understanding and, in particular, create the conditions for an economy that support long-term well-being for all to flourish. And I think most importantly, and as we were talking to each other before the guests were joining, just to show that there are others who are walking the same path, and that that's a really important ingredient to advancing the work that we're all trying to do. In our first episode, we had 3 guest speakers join us: Dr. Lorenzo Fioramonti, Dr. Victoria Hirth, and Ben Renshaw. And they covered a framework approach of the well-being economy, looking at a macro, a meso for purpose-driven organizations, and micro, which would be meaningful work and lives. And that was a great framework. And there's a LinkedIn group where you can explore that further. There's a book coming out as well. But from that session, there was a recognition that we needed to take a deeper look at the role that capital and investment play in accelerating the shift towards a purpose economy. And I think that that led us to this session today, and in particular to our guest speakers. There's a lot that capital is involved in business. We all know that, but I wanted to maybe take a deeper dive into the notion that the way that we're doing business isn't necessarily the best way. And I think there's been a recognition for many years, and in particular over the last several years, that's picked up in terms of finding a better path forward and taking care of people and planet. And it's not necessarily a new idea, and I think that's a theme that you'll hear get touched on. But I wanted to reiterate that at the front end, that we're going to launch into this discussion by talking about different facets of impact, finance, and investing. And my hope is that in conversation with our panelists, we'll understand the nuances a bit better, and that we'll see a shared desire for social purpose and impact investing to see business move beyond profit and look more holistically at business or investment and the opportunity to create long-term well-being for all. So I won't do what I typically do, which is spend a lot of time talking. I want to invite Adam to provide a bit of a context on impact investing, certainly his own journey, how he got here, and then maybe share an insight or two on how impact finance is focused on value creation. And with that, I'll turn it over to you, Adam.
Wonderful. Many thanks, Hamish, Tessa, and Alex, for the opportunity to join today. So Adam Spence from SVX, joining from Toronto, Takaranto, Treaty 13 territory, home of the Mississaugas of the Credit First Nation, Haudenosaunee, Anishinaabe, Huron-Wendat, and many other nations. So delighted to be able to share territory and space with all of you virtually as well. So as said, I started in the community sector, particularly around cross-sectoral organizing, did some work with organizations focused on access to education, poverty reduction, and food security. And around about the Great Recession, I was the executive director of the Ontario Association of Food Banks at the time. It was incredibly challenging, very difficult. Many more folks were turning to us for support, just as we are in this particular moment. We were buying food, we were gleaning food, we were growing food, collecting it from food industry. and came to the conclusion that we cannot feed our way out of this problem with a few days worth of food. We have to change the nature of business as well as capital, so it's oriented towards social, economic, and environmental justice. And so with the background that I'd had in terms of research development and community organizing, wrote a paper on a social stock market. And having no earthly business in financial services other than watching Trading Places with Dan Aykroyd and Eddie Murphy, but having an understanding of how to bring together the right kind of partners and organizations, that became Mars, Government of Ontario, the Toronto Stock Exchange, as well as home organization that I worked at, started to build that initiative, which again was how do you put purpose into investment and bring capital towards tackling the problems that we face. And so I've spent now 18 years working in impact investing in Canada and across the Americas. I think important to root ourselves as well, what is this concept of impact investing? And so we're to understand it's not philanthropy, so we're not giving money away. It's not traditional investing as we've done it or as we've understood it over the past 40 years, where we're seeking to maximize profit. It's in the middle of those two things. And there's responsible investing, which is often negative screening or trying to take out the so-called bad stuff. It is more along the lines of any investment. You want it to be able to have a positive social or environmental impact alongside some form of financial return. It could be a loan to an affordable housing project where you're getting some interest back on that particular investment. It could be a private equity fund focused on sustainable food and agriculture. Folks like Investico here in Toronto do that. Or even now, could be a fund. It's in your portfolio or RSP or otherwise, managed by your financial advisor that invests in renewable energy companies and projects, provides you with returns, dividends, etc. over time, but also has a positive impact. And you'd see that on your portfolio statements. And it's not a new idea. Investing for purpose or impact investing dates way back to the Quakers. I won't spend a lot of time on that, but that was a movement around the elimination of investment capital and business associated with slavery in the Western world. And they chose to be able to take their economic wealth and power out of that. In Canada and otherwise, the co-op and solidarity economy and credit union movements at the turn of the 19th century represented a strong foundation. In the 60s and 80s in Canada and the US, you had social movements, anti-apartheid, faith groups, and activists creating funds, bringing together money where they'd support and invest back in their communities and businesses, organizations, and projects that align with their purpose or their values. In the 90s and the 2000s, you have folks like Chantier de l'Économie Sociale or Social Capital Partners that create larger funds or intermediaries. And then the sector starts to get organized and build the field, more projects, more funds and activities and policy and otherwise. So you have the Canadian Task Force of Social Finance leading to the Social Finance Fund. And the market has really evolved since I started. So assets now $2 billion to over $20 billion here in Canada, over $1 trillion globally. There's over 270 impact investing products versus a handful 5 or 10 or 15 years ago. There's academic institutions that now have programs focused on impact investing. Provincial and federal governments have policies and investments like the $755 million Social Finance Fund. You have foundations, you have families, you have faith-based organizations, financial institutions. There's still a long way to go with institutional investors, but they have strategies or activities that are taking place and active and focused on impact. And even now, everyday investors, you can put in your portfolio, you can use your own capital through community bonds or so-called retail accessible product, those investments that align with your purpose and also deliver a return. And we've learned a lot, from this. And you talked about what's the value, where's the value proposition with this? How do we make or see it work best? It's worked best in many places like the UK, US. We've done work in Latin America, like Mexico and Colombia, also Southeast Asia and beyond. And I think where you have a connected and organized community of stakeholders across sectors that share a vision, that's where we have success. When you have a common understanding of the concept, without sticking too closely to perfect definitions, that's where we have a lot of success. Where we've built a pipeline of investment opportunities, identified those purpose-driven companies. We have the right kind of products and intermediaries that can provide capital. And then when you have an enabling policy environment as well that is right kinds of regulations, right kind of funding and support. I think that's as well where it seemed to be best here in Canada, but also in the many places around the world that we've had the good fortune of working with. But that gives you just a bit of a sum.
Thanks, Adam. And I know that it's tough to boil it all the way down to just a couple minutes. So I appreciate you taking us through some of the historical context as well as your own personal journey. Christelle, I'd like to invite you to share a bit about your background and what got you into impact investing and sort of what you've seen in the time that you've been working in this space.
Absolutely. So interestingly, for me, I actually started my career working in finance in the space of providing capital for commercial development and residential when it comes to housing and development projects. And so initially, I was really just working in the private sector when it comes to capital deployment. But then through that, it evolved, and I wanted to have the opportunity to still be able to work on the financial side, but in a way where we can see capital drive something that really drove a social change. And then that led me to have the opportunity to help launch. So during my time as the president of the Canadian Black Chamber of Commerce, I was able to help drive some policy changes where we were trying to initiate a specific fund that would help provide capital to Black entrepreneurs across Canada that was specifically dedicated to helping transforming that, because as for the Black community at the time, we were seeing that there was some challenges around capital allocation that was much more accessible to be able to be that entrepreneurs can access to. And so through that, there was this fund that was launched, I think it was back in 2021, that was launched, and it was about $160 million fund, part of it federal, and the other one was through BDC. And so that was able to provide some accessible loans to Black entrepreneurs. And through that, we were seeing that as a impact investing vehicle, because we're able to get some public funding, but then through that, we also were securing some private capital with one of the banks that came through. And that was, to me, just a great example of how looking at a specific problem where there was this social barrier, but looking at these two different financing vehicles to help create that success. But through that, as mentioned earlier by Tessa, so I'm also involved so this fund still exists. So it's still out there in terms of a funding allocation. But through that, that led me to really be in contact with other great fund managers in the space that are doing great work. And that's what led me to be involved with TIP. So TIP is the Table of Impact Investment Practitioners. It's a membership-based organization that has various different fund managers across the country. And we are we co-created BOAN, which is one of the three wholesalers. So for those of you who are familiar, or may not be aware, the wholesalers is essentially when the federal government launched the Social Finance Fund, they selected three essential fund managers, let's say, to distribute those funds. And one of those three is BOAN Social Impact. And so BOAN Social Impact is, through the Social Finance Fund. What's been great to see, and in discussion with our members at TIP, for me, it really provides me with that great intersection to be able to see those on the demand side and being able to see on the allocation side in terms of the fund deployments that we're able to offer at BOAN. And through that, it's been really, really interesting to really see growing a fund of that scale, what that actually entails in terms of looking at the returns. But we've been able to see great success in some of the investments that we've made, and also some co-investment initiatives that we've been able to do in Quebec with the Cap Finance project as well, and looking at what that looks like. And what you really learn to see in terms of impact investing, and what I've seen as some of the success, is fund managers that are really able to find, because you need to have financial returns, right? It's not just about the social impact. We want the social impact. It has to be tangible. It has to be measurable. That's the ideal context, so that we can see what works effectively and what doesn't. But also, how are you doing in a way where there's actually that financial return as well, so that we can continue to drive capital to these fund managers that are doing great work. Some of the fund managers are doing agricultural work, investing in entrepreneurs, affordable housing. And another example that I would say that we found to be quite successful at BOAN was our investment in Raven Indigenous Outcomes. Raven Indigenous Outcomes is quite different in scale. It's an outcomes fund that they are tackling the diabetes issues that are happening in various Indigenous communities across Canada. And so it's never been done before in this landscape to really address this type of medical challenge that exists with, private not private, but public funding allocation towards it. And they have co-investors. But that's another example of looking at a specific problem and being able to have those vehicles drive that and enable us to measure that and create the case for more funding, which I know we'll dive into a little bit later, but we want to create a fair case so that private investors can get behind us and provide more capital to help support the communities, the various communities across the country. That was a mouthful, but I hope that was helpful.
Oh yeah, no, and you know what a great panorama, because I think it segues nicely into Joanne, and you've certainly spent a lot of time and developed a lot of expertise working across nonprofit and various sectors. So maybe highlight from your own perspective your journey to where we are today in this conversation, and what led you into impact investing, or kind of like adjacent spaces, and how you've seen things take shape over your time in the space.
Thank you, Hamish. So I'm joining from Coast Salish territory here in Vancouver, British Columbia. And certainly what you can tell from Christelle and Adam's experiences is that there's a marketplace for impact investment right now. There are a variety of things happening. There's government investment now. There's specific funds set up for to support businesses led by underrepresented founders. The Ravens Indigenous Outcome Fund is a really great example of like that. That would 20 years ago, no one would have thought something like that would be possible. And 20 years ago, or in the early 2000s, Adam mentioned a particular organization, Social Capital Partners. That was sort of my entry into the impact investing space in Canada. So so I'm going to just share a little bit about that. And at the time, so this was set up by, so it was a private foundation set up by high net worth individual Bill Young, who decided that he wanted to take a piece of his wealth and do good with it. And he wanted, like Christelle, he wanted to use and leverage his financial background and business background for good. And at the time, that wasn't super well known or common in Canada to set up a foundation specifically to invest in social enterprise. So this was in 2001. So, and I was the founding director for Social Returns. That was what Bill's like, I think, Director of Social Returns. And I'm like, ooh, that's a pretty heady title there. Like at the time, it wasn't a really well-known term. But I'm like, okay, let's do this. And so my role at the time was to work with our portfolio organizations to measure the impact. So we developed an impact measurement process and framework for our original portfolio of social enterprises. And so what that meant was, okay, what is the social value we're creating? And what is the, like we set and discussed with the management teams, what's possible, what is our specific mission here? And in our investment approach, we were investing in enterprises that the social mission was based around the employment strategy. And so I would work with the management teams on on hiring a particular group that had challenges getting into the workforce. So for an example, one was a courier company in Toronto, turnaround couriers. I'm just deep diving a little bit deeper into one specific model of doing impact investing that I was part of. So in the early days, it was tough because I didn't have a lot of colleagues. I didn't have a lot of people that you know, I could discuss, you know, how we should do this, you know, how we should present this, what are the important elements. And then I did, after a couple of years, I was in Toronto at the time, connected with some people at Van City Credit Union out here who were also figuring out how to better measure social value creation, environmental value creation in the context of social enterprise, which can be revenue generating nonprofits or for-profit businesses. And so I would say what's been really interesting for me is just to go from, you know, early 2000s to 2025, when, you know, there's an SVX, you know, there's an exchange. You can go and you can go, okay, well, I'm really motivated I'm really you know, by climate issues. So you can literally go and see what's happening and what are the investment opportunities. Or with BOAN, what Christelle is involved with, like this, there's these three new, you know, they're wholesalers or entities that then are working with mission-driven nonprofit leaders, for-profit leaders, to figure out what is the best deal structure, what is the best return scenario for a particular entity. I mean, this is huge progress for Canada. So that is super exciting for me. And another thing I just want to say, there has been movement, I would say maybe not as quickly as we'd like, but in terms of the Canadian foundation community and the development of toolkits and pathways to illustrate how they can do impact investing from their asset base, from their endowments, and not only think of, okay, you know, we have to do our 3% disbursement in granting, and that's, you know, all the kind of mission-based thinking that happens. So now, you know, foundations across Canada and, you know, globally are really trying to they're looking at their investment policy statements and looking at, okay, what can we do differently to actually integrate our mission of our foundation into our capital wealth and how we think about growing that wealth and dispersing that wealth. So for me, what's interesting, and I hope, and you know, to continue on this pathway, is we're not checking our values at the door when it comes to investing. And I think kind of like, it was interesting because I've met, you know, I didn't come from a traditional finance background, but I've certainly met and worked with along the way people who have, like Christelle, who are like, wow, I can use my skills, my financial skills, but I can also embed my values in my, you know, my societal values into the work I do in the impact investing field. And that's really powerful. So yeah, so I'll stop there.
Oh,
Thank you.
thanks, Joanne. Yeah, I want to hand it over to Tessa, but I did want to just, you know, recognize that the path to where we are today, and that's sort of what Tessa will speak to. And I know, just wanting to be mindful of the time that we've got on the agenda for today. We'll hopefully have some time to talk about the future, but you can see that it's non-linear insofar as there's a lot of momentum that really took some time to build, and now we have this incredible sense of energy that's coming through the system that's trying to inflect change in a variety of ways. And so, you know, that's a real tailwind. I'm going to give it to Tessa to talk about some of the headwinds that, you know, collectively we're facing. You know, certainly what we hear and see in the news unfolding on a daily basis is presenting some challenge to the way that we have thought about the past and how we've envisioned working into the future. So this will sort of be a blend of where we are at today and maybe where we go from here. So maybe Tessa, you can take it from here.
Yeah, thanks, Hamish. I think, what's so interesting about this discussion is about values, about people wanting to see certain kinds of outcomes. And when you align those values, how powerful that can be. And so the maturing, I think, of this impact market, I think is really interesting, I think, to me, and also hopeful, because when we collectively put our minds to these things, we can make them happen, I think, over time. So, when we first organized this event a few months ago, it really feels like, 20 years ago, considering, the additional challenges we face really with a potential trade war between Canada and the United States. And, here we are, and what we're talking about today is really, a country that we embrace pluralism, we're tackling climate change, and yet there's, really a current dismantling of many of these things around us. And so, amidst all of this uncertainty, like how does this translate to the Canadian context? And, how is impact finance in Canada adapting to the things we see unfolding around us? And how do we advocate and invest in the future that we are really wanting to have? So, Adam, I'm going to let you kick this off, and I would love to invite you to share your thoughts.
Thanks for the question. It is a small one, and I don't have all the answers, but happy to offer a bit of perspective. So, I think we all know we're looking at potentially lower economic growth, higher prices, lost income, flight of business, talented capital, and potentially harder times. And so what that means for us in our world is uncertainty for investors, for business and government. And that is the potential then to have fewer resources, a reversion to traditional investment approaches, which may seem safe. They are not necessarily so, and also perceived greater investment risk. And all of the attention, whether it's media, government, the hockey game, is focused on how we manage a very unpredictable partner, and who was our BFF, and now has fundamentally changed the frame by which they are going to operate and have a relationship with us. Now, the adaptation or the opportunity is actually, in our mind, both purpose as well as impact investing may provide a path for the future. So how do we adapt? Well, I think there's necessity around framing and bringing forward what is a message. And one of those messages is well understood, I think, by all, most, if not many, is we're going to need to mobilize more local capital into local businesses, organizations, and projects. And the purpose of that is not only for relief, but also adaptation, resiliency, and advancing the purposes which I think we all share, which is how do we advance things like reconciliation? How are we building more housing? How are we creating a more renewable and resilient energy grid and beyond? And so we have this opportunity to adapt, but adapt in a way that embeds purpose, and one which again is shared by all, which is, yes, let's think about how we can get more local capital back. I think we'll also need to adapt or think about how we prioritize international development, partnerships, and trade. And this is, yes, Canada first, I think, is a shared agenda by many, but not Canada alone. And we have an opportunity to build bridges, make connections, and advance and continue those relationships. And so when we think about how purpose-driven organizations may have greater opportunities and receptivity around the world, an environment where the U.S. is withdrawing and changing its relationship and leadership role. And so I think that's an adaptation opportunity for us, again, as Canadians who come in often as neutral conveners, partners, seen as generally friendly, nice people that others have opportunities and ways to do business with, and ones that are good at it. And then I think we also can adapt and get organized across sectors and collectively be part of what is described as a Team Canada approach for the next 4 years and beyond. So it's business, Indigenous, civil society, labor, academic, policy, and other community leaders. We're going to need to get organized in our respective spheres, but also organize across so that we're kind of supporting and advancing a pretty common agenda. So get just a few thoughts behind it back.
Thanks, Adam. Christelle, I'd love to hear your thoughts on this.
It is a little bit challenging. I mean, I'm not gonna sugarcoat it. We are seeing when it comes to investments, certain drawback, certain pullback, hesitancy. That's just what's happening currently in the marketplace. And we're also seeing that a shift in language when you talk about social purpose, social investing. What does that mean? And so we're seeing some of the language change. And when you see language changing within a society, that's also an indication in terms of how certain decisions will be made and what that actually looks like. So that's part of what we're seeing. But I think the opportunity, and I want to build on one of the points that Adam touched on, is really looking for Canada to build and be proactive in terms of building relationships with other international players as well, in terms of what that looks like. One of the other things that we've seen be much more effective also is having the different sectors look in terms of how we're going to be able to support social finance and what it looks like in terms of impact investing. So what does that mean? That includes really bringing in the philanthropic donors to the conversation. We know private investors are slowly pulling back a little bit more, but how do we bring in the philanthropic? How do we maybe have a conversation with the pension funds as well? And what does international relations look like in terms of helping still stimulate our economy and drive funding to these initiatives? We're going to see, where we're really going to see a hard pivot, I should say, is around localized communities. And what's going to happen is that we know there's a trickle-down effect. There's challenges that are already quite evident as well. We know the housing crisis, food shortage, et cetera. But we're going to need some of that collaboration between some of the NGOs, the nonprofits, and the funders to be able to now explore new solutions to actually, because we're going to be in unprecedented economic times, job shortages, and just socially, I think there's a bit of this fear that you kind of sense when you speak to people and when you see what's happening. And so being open to adapt to new solutions when it comes to funding. So I think that's going to be one of the ways to ensure that there is success and that no community is left behind as well. Having that openness to find new solutions and not just the standard funding buckets that everything kind of falls into. There's now going to be there's going to be overlap, and there's going to be new products and new solutions that need to be provided to ensure that we're able to help all these various communities while still driving impact investing forward.
Thanks, Christelle. I'm hearing adaptability, working across sectoral collaboration, maybe thinking a little bit outside of the box and looking at our international partners and even sort of, locally, who can we work with that we might not have otherwise have thought of working with before, right? What are the opportunities? Joanne, I'd love to hear from you.
Adam and Christelle have shared a lot of what's happening and sort of how people are feeling and what market forces are doing. I think one thing that I would just add is that I think part of our job for people who work and support and advocate for more impact investing is to show the asset owners in the world, whether they be foundations, family offices in the private sector, or pension funds and other institutional investors. We need to make it accessible, and we need to, in terms of the practice of doing this and why to do this and how you can do it, how you can get going. I think sometimes, we have some leaders that, for example, the McConnell Family Foundation, an amazing leader in sharing all that they're doing in terms of their impact investment thesis with their endowments and their wealth. but it can look like, oh my God, do I have to do that? You know, like you don't have to, you know, put 100%, but you could start with, you know, you could create a part of your endowment that is, you know, just specifically for impact investing and, you know, around a particular mission area that, you know, that obviously aligns with what your foundation does or your donor advised fund. To Christelle's point, we have to unlock some of this capital to work differently and not just have it all be in traditional investments and then they do a little bit of grant making. That's the opportunity for, you know, a term for catalytic capital to get into the marketplace to then, you know, be able to maybe provide a risk mitigation for a different kind of investor to get involved. Those are the kinds of things I think that we're doing and that we need to do more of in this climate going forward.
Thanks, Joanne. I'm just mindful of the time, so I'm just going to quickly send it over to Hamish for the last question. And I notice there are also some questions in the chat, which we don't have an opportunity to answer now. We'll definitely get the answers for you and send them to you. So, but thank you.
I want to recognize that there's lots of great questions coming through. So maybe what we can do is, you know, in the spirit of the question, it sounds like agility is going to be a really important principle at play here. And if there's one upshot of someone essentially throwing convention to the wind, that like then rules can be rewritten in real time. Which is, you know, again, a tricky prospect when the very nature of the work that investing is sort of predicated on is like thinking through data, looking at precedent, and then sort of establishing over a time horizon what a likely outcome is intended to be. So, you know, writing things in real time isn't really a comfort zone. But I'm wondering, you know, if you lean into the principles of the work that you do, and recognizing we're also coming into an election cycle, maybe I can shift the question to what do you think, and just sort of like take 30 seconds or a moment just to answer what you think the top priority that as business owners, operators that are working in the purpose space, what might we want to advocate for that would then allow the systems in which you work help to steward capital or shift capital towards a more purpose-driven space. So kind of what should we think about as a top priority? Maybe I'll start with you, Christelle.
I think that's an excellent question. What can purpose entrepreneurs think about and advocate for? So there's a few things. From a policy perspective, I think it's what we need to have in place in an ideal situation is where you have regulatory CRA incentives for capital to be able to be driven down to impact related funds that could then in turn invest in these entrepreneurs or social purpose driven organizations. So from a policy perspective, that's something that can be advocated for. And then separately, I think the other piece would be around, you know, what policies can be made in terms of some of these companies in terms of defining themselves as a social purpose organizations, having some open transparency about where these funds are accessible as well. So right now, I think if you're within the space, sometimes you're aware of what's happening, but there's a lack of, I think, transparency in terms of where funds are available for these entrepreneurs. And I think that would be another piece from a policy perspective that can be advocated for so that they can go out there and get some of the funding that is available to them.
Great, thanks. Joanne, 30 seconds on that one.
I think for the entrepreneur side, I think what's really important is that they can clearly communicate the value they're creating and know how to connect with the investor profile that cares about that value. So I'm just reiterating what Christelle's saying, like the matchmaking can be a pain point, but I think, you know, we're at a better place than we were 20 years ago. I mean, if you go to the BOAN website or you go to SVX, you can see what they're investing in, what the investment theses are. So it's better, but it can definitely get better.
Awesome. And last word to you, Adam.
Yeah, lots of echo. So one, I think we add fuel to BDC, FCC, EDC. How do you capitalize those crown corporations so they can finance and support purpose-driven companies? I think echoing as well, how can we create regulatory mandates for purpose-driven investments in local businesses, organizations, projects, and funds? And so the US equivalent is the Community Reinvestment Act. It mandates financial institutions to invest back in community and in businesses that have a purpose. It's interesting that TD Bank, BMO, other institutions in the US invest billions of dollars into affordable housing projects, companies and organizations have an impact, have a purpose, and report on it, but do not have the same mandate or requirements here. The same can be said for pension funds. You look at, I mean, there's already existing CDPQ has a mandate enshrined in legislation to invest back in the local economy as well as deliver a return. It has tens of billions of dollars in assets, and over 20% of its portfolio is invested back in Quebec. We can do that across the country and at a provincial level as well. I think having tax incentives for local investments as well, potentially intermediaries as well as companies. And then it said, how do you have a control function to that, a certification or recognition process for those institutions and intermediaries to prove, yes, you have an impact. Yes, you're investing for this particular purpose at a local level. And again, there is cases and examples for all of those things that we can collectively advocate for that sits and rests on precedent.
Awesome. And again, to end on a positive note, this is a really great conversation. There are some follow-up conversations happening that will explore purpose and investing and, you know, the mindset of impact investing that I think SVX is hosting and collaborating with as well. So there is more to be said and sort of explored here, but I want to make space for Q&A as well in some of the closing minutes. So maybe we could take 2-3 questions. We'll see if we can squeeze the third one in.
There's a couple in the chat. There's a few in the chat, Hamish. So why don't we just go with Kirsten's? So the potential advantages of tri-sector collaboration seem clear, but partnership development, including all three, private, public, and civil society, in practice is quite difficult. I'm curious to know if you have any examples of success in this regard.
I'm happy to start. It's always everyone looks and see who's unmutes or mutes first. But maybe I'll just say where Christelle and I are right now. We're in the Mars Center, Mars Discovery District, which is about 1 million square feet of space. It is a partnership with Government of Ontario, Government of Canada, has investment and support from a number of different philanthropic and private sector partners, and seeks to be able to drive innovation and collaboration across sectors to support Canada's innovation economy, which includes impact across health, clean tech, and many other sectors. So that's an institution or organization. I think the work of the Canadian Task Force on Social Finance, which was part of the building efforts around the social finance sector in Canada, that included individuals and organizations and of across sectors, from community organizations to financial institutions to foundations. I think it requires, and there's many other examples, but I'll just maybe talk very briefly. I think it requires funding and support. You need to be able to resource and invest in supporting kind of collaborative efforts and system changing efforts. There's not a lot of resources for that, but I think we imagine what philanthropic organizations are doing. I think we'll need to invest in the organizing infrastructure we require to meet the challenge of the moment.
Thank you, Adam. There's another question, like Catherine. Hi, Catherine. Are we worried at all about the impact of a federal government change on the Canada Social Impact Fund or the policy environment that supports impact investing?
Happy to take this one.
Who's got the mute button?
Yes. Are we worried? A little bit, to be honest, because the reality is half of the allocated funds. So in total, it's about 788 million. And then you divide it by the 3, and then you have Cap Finance that has a separate amount. We've received half of the funding. And is it possible that a new government change could claw that money back? Technically, yes. We don't expect that to be the case, for them to claw it back because of how it's been performing and because of just how it is actually good for the Canadian economy. So it's not something that we're expecting. We're not being, super reactive in that way, but we are cognizant of that factor. And with that, you have to necessarily build relationships with other private investors. So all the different funds are also still fundraising to ensure that they can have continual capital flow. So you still remain proactive, but it is something to be aware of. Like I said, we don't expect that to happen, but it is a possibility. And with that in mind, each fund is making sure that they are ramping up their other private capital investments to be able to continue to do the work, and ensure that the current portfolios that we have can demonstrate that return on investment as well, which can continue that cycle of investment. So that's how we're feeling confident and positive about moving forward.
Thanks, Christelle. Another one from the chat. Is there a Canadian equivalent to UK's Social Value Act? I see Joanne going for the mute button.
Well, only to say I don't believe so. I mean, the social finance fund and framework is really the first big move that the government of Canada has done in this space. So I don't think so. I don't know, Adam or Christelle. Yeah.
The closest maybe municipal procurement requirements, like I think City of Toronto, it's not to the same national or provincial extent. Perhaps in Quebec from a social economy perspective. But again, that happy to be able to follow up on that, and those folks that have spent decades building that, they may be able to speak to that really well.
Thank you.
We did have one question that came through on the Q&A, which is maybe an easy one, but a good segue into like future topics that are coming up. Adam, the difference between purpose investing and impact investing, the nuance is important. Maybe you can, in 30 seconds to a minute, kind of give a distinction there.
I think there's a lot of similar language used, or a lot of language used for similar things. So there's purpose investing, there's responsible investing, sustainable investing, regenerative investing, community investing, social investing, investing. But I think my sense is there's a specific definition for impact investing, which again is how do you both drive social and environmental impact as well as deliver financial returns. So there's two core components to it. And often, as said, well, grabbed Christelle as well, it's measurable, you meet certain standards, etc. Purpose investing may be a more value-based description, right? So it may have a wider scope to it, may include a wider range of opportunities, and could be closer kind of focus on more business, because purpose business, and maybe closer on the responsible investing side of things. But I think we would see, and this is only our organizational view on it, it's all very much in line with the same thing. And so I think what we try to advocate for is, yes, you may have different definitions and you can form those, but I think they're all part of the same tent. And so I would see impact investing and purpose investing part of the same tent. And so we are cousins or brothers and sisters and others. So I'd see a lot of similarities between them. But others, from an academic perspective or institutional perspective, may have a different view, and certainly welcome that.
Yeah, and I think I would probably just tack on the landscape continues to evolve and flourish. So 20-something years ago, the structures that were being envisioned were very different than maybe like the next 20 years looking forward. And certainly what we can imagine will come to fruition is a lot more of those different nuanced interpretations of investing that can hopefully address what's coming that we don't yet know about, and ideally we'll be able to have some degree of influence and mobilization of capital towards addressing the different challenges and opportunities that a lot of those uncertainties are going to present. I know we're coming close to time here, so I wanted to close up first by thanking our guests, Adam, Christelle, Joanne. It's been exceptional. I know that this is an hour is really not enough. It's already flown by, but there are some follow-up opportunities for these kinds of conversations that will be taking place in the coming weeks. So I'll let Tessa tee that up as well. But thank you all again, and certainly thanks to everybody. Tessa, I'll turn it over to you to close this out.
Yeah, thanks so much, Christelle, Adam, Joanne, for joining us today. It's an action-packed topic, and an hour is very challenging, but thank you so much. We launched Purpose Connections really as a way to bring people together to connect and learn and really be inspired by the actions of so many people who are working in so many different spaces to build the kind of the world that we really want, really based on social equality and planetary health. So we'll be announcing the next Purpose Connection session through email and regular communications. And we'll also be sharing the recording of this session with everyone later on through email. Please also join business leaders and peers who have signed the Canadian Purpose Economy Project's Call to Purpose. We have, I think, over 200 business leaders across the country who have signed this. Please, we'll put the link, we'll send you the link if it's not in the chat. And please join us for 2 more upcoming free social purpose webinars in which the Canadian Purpose Economy Project has collaborated, and you can register using the links in the chat. Thank you for joining us today, and stay tuned for our next Purpose Connections, which will be coming in April. And thanks to all of you for joining us. We can make this world the place we want it to be. Thank you, everyone. I really appreciate it.
Thanks, everybody.
Thanks.
Thank
Bye-bye.
you.
Thank you. Bye.